On the 8th of December, 1864, the Clifton Suspension Bridge finally opened. Bristol celebrated, but the city that crossed that bridge was no longer the trading giant it had been. Liverpool had taken the port, Glasgow had taken the tobacco, London had taken the capital. Bristol needed a new identity, and for a while it found one in chocolate, cigarettes and aircraft engines. Then the bombs came. This video uses artificial intelligence to visually reconstruct what Bristol may have looked like from the Victorian era to the present day. AI allows us to step into streets and factories that no longer exist, but some visual details may not be perfectly accurate. The history, however, is real. The port may have lost its empire, but Bristol reinvented itself from the inside. The city that once refined Caribbean sugar now manufactured chocolate. The Fry family, who had been making cocoa in Bristol since the 1750s, produced one of the first solid chocolate bars in the 1840s. By 1914, their sales had reached nearly £2 million a year. Bristol had become the chocolate capital of England. Tobacco followed the same path. The Wills family had been processing Virginian tobacco since the 1780s. By the end of the 19th century, their factory employed around 2,000 workers. In 1901, they merged with 12 other firms to create Imperial Tobacco, one of the largest companies in the country. The Wills fortune built the University of Bristol and its most iconic building, the Memorial Tower, which still dominates the skyline. The old city docks could no longer handle the larger ships of the industrial age, so in 1877, new docks opened at Avonmouth, right at the mouth of the river, bypassing the narrow Avon Gorge entirely. Horse-drawn trams ran through the streets from 1874. Electric trams replaced them in 1895. The population surged past 300,000 by the turn of the century. Then in 1910, a Bristol businessman founded the British and Colonial Aeroplane Company at Filton, north of the city. Within 4 years, Bristol was building fighter planes for a war that nobody saw coming. The city that had once launched ships across the Atlantic was now building machines that could fly. The planes came for Bristol because of what it built. The Bristol Aeroplane Company at Filton was producing fighter planes for the Royal Air Force. The docks at Avonmouth were receiving supplies for half of southern England. And the German navigators had an easy guide. They followed the River Avon by moonlight straight to the city centre. Between November 1940 and April 1941, Bristol was hit by 6 major bombing raids. On the first night alone, the 24th of November, 148 bombers dropped over 12,000 incendiary devices on the city. Within an hour, more than 70 fires were burning. By morning, 207 people were dead. The raids kept coming. On the 3rd of January 1941, the longest raid lasted 12 hours. Temple Meads station was hit. Queen Square was damaged. The medieval city centre was gutted. 4 ancient churches were destroyed. The timber-framed Dutch house, standing since the 1600s, burned to the ground. By the time the last major raid struck on Good Friday 1941, nearly 1,300 people had been killed. Over 89,000 buildings were damaged. The mayor described what was left. The city of churches had become the city of ruins. Churchill visited the wreckage in April. The Blitz had erased centuries of Bristol's history in a matter of months. If you're enjoying this journey through Bristol's history, joining the channel as a member would mean a lot for its development. Every bit of support helps us keep rebuilding the past. After the war, Bristol rebuilt in concrete and steel. Much of what replaced the medieval centre was functional but plain. The docks declined. The old industries faded. By the 1970s, the city felt like it had lost its purpose. But something was growing in the backstreets. In the neighbourhood of St. Paul's, a diverse community of Caribbean, African and white working-class families had created a music scene unlike anything in Britain. Sound systems, reggae, funk and hip-hop collided in house parties and underground clubs. A collective of musicians and DJs called the Wild Bunch started throwing parties that mixed everything together. In 1991, members of that collective released an album called Blue Lines under the name Massive Attack. It is now considered the first trip-hop record ever made. Within 4 years, 2 more Bristol acts had followed. Portishead, whose debut album Dummy won the Mercury Prize, and Tricky, whose album was described as a masterpiece of dark ambience. Bristol had created a genre. And on the walls of Stokes Croft, a young graffiti artist was painting his first major mural. In 1997, he sprayed a teddy bear throwing a firebomb at riot police. His name was Banksy. Bristol was no longer just a port or a factory town, it was becoming something else entirely. In 1970, the SS Great Britain was towed back from the Falkland Islands across 8,000 miles of ocean and returned to the exact dock where Brunel had built her 127 years earlier. 100,000 people lined the riverbanks to watch. Bristol was learning to reclaim its own past. The Harbour Festival began in the early 1970s. The Balloon Fiesta launched in 1979. The old docks became museums, galleries, restaurants. The city was reinventing itself through culture, not cargo. Then on the 7th of June 2020, during the global protests that followed the death of George Floyd, a crowd in Bristol pulled down the bronze statue of Edward Colston. He had been a senior official in the Royal African Company, responsible for the transport of around 80,000 people into slavery. His statue had stood in the city centre since 1895. The crowd rolled it through the streets and threw it into the harbour. The statue was retrieved days later and placed in the M Shed Museum, lying flat, still covered in graffiti, alongside protest placards. 4 people were charged with criminal damage. In January 2022, a jury acquitted all 4. The city that had once celebrated Colston as its greatest benefactor was now confronting what his wealth had actually cost. Bristol today is a city of street art and startups, Brunel's Iron Ship and Banksy's stencils, Georgian townhouses and harbour festivals. It has spent 1,000 years building, losing and rebuilding its identity. And it is still not finished.